Good evening, India, and good morning, America. You are watching Doordarshan India's 360-degree most comprehensive coast-to-coast coverage with a galaxy of reporters in the United States and domain experts from US and India on the US presidential elections. Well over 96 million people in America have already voted in the early voting in the United States. November 3rd, that is today, will mark the end of voting in the country. Today on election day, polls opened shortly after midnight in the hamlet of Dixville Notch in the state of New Hampshire. Dixville Notch residents have cast the first ballot of election day for the last 60 years, and they have done so again. Watch DD India's 14-hour coverage of the US presidential polls that has just begun with us to know every move of Trump and Biden teams and why this election matters to India and the world. I'm Munmun Bhattacharya, and with me is my colleague, Shubhendu Ghosh.
Thanks very much, Munmun. The big question, who will take the White House next, is the question everyone's focusing on. Will it be President Donald Trump all the way again, or will former Vice President Joe Biden finally land the top job? Namaskar and welcome to DD India to this very special coverage of United States presidential elections. It's 6 p.m. here in New Delhi and 7:30 a.m. in Washington, D.C. But wherever in the world you are, if you're interested in American elections, understand the implications of it on the world, on India in particular, this is the place to be. Our correspondents are spread through the length and breadth of United States. A distinguished panel of guests, Munmun, will be joining us every hour to decode the election process and core issues. Record early voting, as Munmun mentioned, already made the contest exciting. There is, however, some nervousness and apprehensions as well as security is beefed up in towns and cities across America. We bring you the race for White House. Let's first look at the top stories at this hour. It's D-Day for United States as Americans vote to decide fate of incumbent President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden, who are head-to-head in the US presidential polls. Voting kicks off in the United States with the first ballots cast in Dixville Notch and Millsfield towns in the northeastern state of New Hampshire. To win the presidency, either Trump or Biden must acquire over 50% of the Electoral College vote of 538, a minimum of 270 electoral votes needed to clinch the presidency. Meanwhile, Joe Biden continues to lead Donald Trump in the national opinion polls. If elected, he would be the oldest president in US history at 78 years of age. Trump would also be the oldest president ever if he wins a second term. He's currently 74. And DD India gets you extensive coverage of US presidential elections like never before. Get all the news, views, analysis on just one platform, DD India and its social media handles.
And it is election day in the US, and we'll get you a ground report from Ira Spitzer in California. But before that, let's do a brief introduction of our guests. Joining us is Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States. Dr. Mohankumar, chairman RIS think tank in Delhi, will be joining us in just a bit. Vishnu Prakash, a former envoy to Canada and South Korea, Foreign Office spokesperson and Consul General Shanghai, and now Foreign Affairs Specialist, is also with us. And Dr. Harinder Sekho, Strategic Affairs Analyst. I welcome you all, a power-packed panel on this special broadcast on DD India. But before we get started, let's get a ground report from a correspondent, Shubhendu.
Absolutely. It's election day in the United States, with Americans deciding between second term for President Donald Trump or giving the office to his challenger, former Vice President Joe Biden. The campaign, which was waged amid the coronavirus pandemic, has been one of the most divisive in the country's modern history. Ira Spitzer brings us more from San Francisco, California.
The moment has finally arrived, the day that Americans, and indeed people around the world, have been waiting for, the decision for the United States between President Donald Trump and his challenger, the former Vice President Joe Biden. It's been an election season like no other in history for a variety of reasons, but a big one has been the coronavirus pandemic. It has changed the very nature of voting here in this country, with an unprecedented number of people casting their ballots by mail because of concern about actually going to vote in person. The pandemic has also been the largest campaign issue, or it really has cast its very long shadow over this campaign. At the very least, both the tremendous suffering of the American public because of the disease, as well as the tremendous economic toll that the pandemic has taken. So the voters really are, to some extent, making their voices heard about the president's handling of that pandemic, as well as their feelings about how the challenger, Joe Biden, might move things forward. It's certainly been a at times extremely ugly and divisive contest, and we are also expecting potentially not a final result to come in on Tuesday night, because in many cases it will take longer to count all of these mail-in ballots. That has led to some concern about civil unrest here. We've seen images of businesses in cities boarding up their establishments in preparation for some kind of riot or protest. President Trump has indicated that he, and without really any evidence, has indicated that he might not accept the results of some of these mail-in ballots, which he claims are have a higher potential for fraud. So that has led to concerns about the president potentially declaring victory before all of the ballots are counted. But we'll have to see how that all plays out. But one thing we do know is that after the polls close on Tuesday, all of the votes will be cast, and then the United States will enter some sort of new era. And it's certainly been a very eventful 4 years so far under President Trump. Ira Spitzer, San Francisco.
So Mr. Spitzer has set the stage for us for this discourse on the US presidential elections. But remember, viewers, that DD India is bringing to you the most comprehensive coverage of the US presidential elections. And here's how we've got you fully covered this time.
All eyes are on the US election, and we at DD India have you covered with everything there is to know about it. A galaxy of top-notch influencers, opinion makers and subject experts from India and the United States. A full complement of reporters covering coast to coast with everything in between. And a top-of-the-line production hub, all put together by an enthusiastic team using state-of-the-art technology and innovation. Our experts will walk you through complex issues in a language you understand. The former ambassadors, academics and journalists bring a wealth of experience and knowledge. And our reporters will cut through the noise and cut to the chase. Nina Maria Potts in Washington, D.C., William Dancelo in the Battleground state of Wisconsin, and Ira Spitzer in San Francisco. Kate Fisher is tracking Trump, and Nick Harper is following the Biden campaign. All packed into 14 hours of live coverage of the race for the White House, so that you, the viewer, know what it takes to be on the top of the news.
So there's an extensive coverage planned by DD India. Munmun, it's going to be a marathon, not just in the United States, but in India as well, keenly watching what happens in America. And the perspective that we'll also try to look at closely is what it means for India, whoever takes the office.
And the world, of course. And now, our PAPACT panel is with us. You can see Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States, strategic affairs analyst Dr. Harinder Sekho, as well as Ambassador Vishnu Prakash with us. Meera Shankar, I'll come to you first. These are very different times for a US presidential election. There is a pandemic which is on. Besides that, there have been reports of social unrest since summer there in the United States. And there is also a sense of economic trouble with joblessness being reported in large numbers. How would you see this election in the domestic context of the United States? How significant is it in the domestic context before we come to the global context?
Well, I think that this is an election where both candidates are offering very, very different approaches to economic policy, to energy and climate change policy, to health policy, and to foreign policy. So there are very clear choices before the American people in terms of who they would like for their next president. It isn't that both are broadly, offering the same policies. No, their approaches are very, very different. Yes, this election takes place at a time of a pandemic. Cases are rising in the United States and almost touching a lakh a day, which would be some kind of a new watershed in terms of the number of cases. And President Trump's handling of the pandemic has been his weakest spot in terms of how the public perceives whether the administration has been successful in handling the pandemic or not. So I think this is his weakest spot, and one of the issues of greatest concern, if you go by all the polls, what are the issues which concern the American people today? Then the pandemic is number one. Two is the economic crisis caused by the pandemic, and how to revive growth and jobs in the Indian economy. I think foreign policy follows much later as a priority. And climate change is something where President Trump has basically given no emphasis, but Biden makes that one of the centerpieces of his agenda.
Right. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, if I can come to you, sir. Ambassador Meera Shankar just listed some of the key issues that are at the heart of the US elections, but Trump and Biden also offer two distinct vision of value system of future of America. In that terms, how do you see these elections, whether it is recovering the sort of high moral ground liberal democracy of Biden or following the chart of the might and strength of America, the version that Trump seems to propagate? How do you see these elections a clash of value systems of America as well?
Basically, the contest between the two leaders is, if I were to sum up in one line, President Trump is engaging in fear, threats. He is talking about how the leftists will come back to power, how America will become a big prison, whereas Vice President Biden is offering hope. So it is basically a contest between hope and fear at one level. And the fact remains that America today is highly divided. Things are quite tense. The society is at an edge and the society is angry. The big two challenges that these country is facing, one is certainly the coronavirus, and Vice President Biden has already said that on day one, he will bring about changes. And he has accused President Trump of following almost a criminal outlook, criminal approach. And second is the economic considerations. So these are the two basic issues. The rest are a matter of details, but it is going to be a keenly contested election. And last comment I would like to make is that President Trump is catching up with Vice President Biden. The lead is shrinking, so it is a toss-up in many states. It is getting more and more interesting by the minute.
So let's take that point further. Dr. Harinder Sikho, your thoughts on the importance of battleground states in this election. We've seen a lot of focus in the last 1 month or so, particularly by both Biden as well as Trump, on at least 6 of those battleground states, and we saw the kind of impact they had in 2016, where they totally changed the course of the election. Hillary Clinton had won more popular votes, but because of the swing states victory that Trump had got, Trump managed to carry the Electoral College with him. So how do you look at the last-ditch effort being put in by both sides as far as this battleground states is concerned?
I think the last few elections, the battleground states have assumed a great deal of significance because of the Electoral College votes that they carry. And as you've just mentioned, though Hillary Clinton had got more than 3 million popular votes, much more than Trump, but he beat her because he was able to carry the battleground, the Electoral College votes. And if you've noticed in the last 2 days, both candidates have focused extensively on 6 to 8 of the battleground states, and more especially Pennsylvania, which has 20 Electoral College votes. And Pennsylvania is going to start counting its postal ballots and the advanced votes that were cast only after tomorrow. So, so even if the rest of the results come in, those 20 votes, if it's a close fight, as is going to be expected, the battleground states assume significance.
So Dr.
Even
Sikho,
then,
if I may come in here, are you suggesting that Pennsylvania could decide this election if it comes down to the wire? It has 20 electoral votes.
It could, if it's a close fight, as was done by Florida when George W. Bush won the elections against
Al Gore.
When he won the election, it was Florida which went in for a repoll and swung the election in favor of Bush.
Yes.
So I think Pennsylvania is very important, and that is why the two candidates are focusing their attention there. But apart from that, the 8 battleground states of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, and Minnesota, they have 24% of the Electoral College votes. And that is the reason, which is a very sizable chunk of the Electoral College. And that is why, if you focus on these 8 states, and over here they're equally divided between the Republicans and the Democrats. So I think that is the reason why these swing states have assumed greater significance in the last few elections, and more so this time. And the candidates, I think even Biden has realized that after what happened to Hillary Clinton in 2016, nobody can leave things to chance in the battleground states. So that is why they are important. And in the battleground states, wherever there is a sizable population of Indian Americans, that is the reason why we see that both candidates are focusing on this element of the electorate as well.
Well, we'll take a conversation forward on the significance of the swing states, also the role that Indian Americans have to play. But let's, for now, Munmun, understand the importance of the process of US elections. It's a little different. It's not the popular vote, but Electoral College vote that determines who's going to take the White House. Let's now understand the details of how President of the United States is elected. Amrit Pal, our colleague, is joining us now for that. Amrit.
That's right, Shubhendu. It's a very complex process in the US, unlike in India, where the party with the most popular vote gets the election. But there they have an electoral college. These electors get elected from the states. Today, the Americans, when they are voting, they are actually voting on the ballot. They have these electors in their states which they are voting for, and then the number of electors you get, and then if you get more than the other, then the whole state goes one way. The electors usually vote for the candidate they are selected for. If I can put it out in graphics and explain that to you, how the US president is elected. An electoral college comprising of 538 electors is what is going to be elected today as the Americans vote. It's a state-based system. There are 50 states and one federal territory of DC, which will be going to the vote, which is going to the votes right now. It's not the popular vote that decides the winner, but what you get is the number of electors you get in the state. The state-based system, as I said, is not is not by the popular vote. You get the popular vote in that particular state. Every state has a group of electors who are chosen by the political parties for which the Americans are voting today. Each of the 50 states get electoral votes based on their population size. Some states are bigger, therefore they have bigger, more electors. Like the 6 states which have most electors are California, that's the biggest state with the most population. It has 55 electors. Texas has 38, New York has 29, Florida again 29, Illinois 20, and Pennsylvania 20. So these are the big states which have huge electors. 7 least populous states are Alaska, Delaware, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, and Wyoming, and they have just 3 electors each. It is based on the population size. The presidential candidate candidates compete to win the Electoral College votes. So that's what these electors finally again vote. The candidate who wins the popular vote in a state gets all the electoral votes in that particular state. A total of, as I said, 538 electors are elected in the electoral colleges, in the Electoral College, and these are the votes which are up for grabs. The winner is the candidate who wins 270 or more of these Electoral College votes. So a candidate who gets 270 or more of these electors' vote becomes the President of the United States. Projected winner is announced on election night itself. That means that the counting process begins right away after voting is over. In the event of an Electoral College tie, the House decides the winner. And so that's how this whole process works out. And these electors do vote later. If we look at on November 3rd, that's today, the United States presidential election takes place. The Americans are presently voting in different states of the United States. They'll elect the electors on December 14th. That's next month. These electors vote in their states. There are 2 kind of electors. One are sworn electors. One are the unfaithful electors.
Yes.
Technically, they can vote wherever they wish to, but generally it is seen, if few exceptions vote otherwise, but generally it is seen they vote for the candidate who they pledge their support to. Congress counts the electoral votes on the on the 6th of January next year, and then on the 20th of January, the inauguration of the new president of the United States is made. So the next term actually begins once the inauguration is done. The president is sworn in. But today, once the votes come in, if it is a clear mandate, we'll get to know by Indian time tomorrow morning or by tomorrow by the day that who the next president of the United States will be.
Right. Amrit, thanks very much for taking us through the process of voting and the election of the President of the United States of America. Ambassador Meera Shankar continues to be with us. Ambassador Meera Shankar, we're trying to understand the ways in which the election process is unique. So getting the popular vote is not the key as many would think. It is winning each of the states to take the most powerful office.
Yes. I think this electoral college system was introduced basically as a safeguard, in case the popular vote went to Ori. And it's been there as part of the US system ever since. So right now, if you look at the polls, I mean, Joe Biden is ahead. anywhere between 7 to 10 points at the national level in terms of the polls. It's come down in recent days from 8 to about 7.
Yes.
In the battleground states, the picture is more uneven. And here, Biden has been leading in Michigan with a more than 5-point lead. He's been leading in Wisconsin with a very significant lead. Pennsylvania has come into play in the sense that his lead is less than 5. It's some say 4 percentage points, some polls say 2. So it's in play. And then there are other states, North Carolina, Iowa, and so on, which are also there, Georgia, Arizona, Florida. And in these states, actually, the numbers are very, very thin. And the polls have also been fluctuating. For instance, Joe Biden was ahead in North Carolina. Now the latest polls show President Trump ahead by something like 0.5, 0.5. So very, very, thin margins, and it's uncertain where it would go. But by and large, the battleground states seem to have, Joe Biden in the lead by either 4 to 5 percentage points or by a little less.
Absolutely.
Now,
Yeah.
Georgia, Florida, and Arizona had all voted Republican in the last election. This time, they are uncertain. Arizona, the lead is, it's showing Biden with 1 to 2 percentage points. So very fragile leads, which could change.
Absolutely.
Georgia, latest polls show President Trump leading, whereas earlier Biden was ahead by some few percentage points. And Florida, again, has been seesawing. So some of these states are in play. And President Trump has been making a very focused effort in the last few days with almost 4 rallies in Pennsylvania and another event hosted by his wife. And Joe Biden has also been focusing on this. So while pollsters, and if you look at the betting odds, then all the bets are on Biden, for Biden, much larger lead in the betting. But no one is really calling the election because of the problems last time that the polls had not reflected the situation accurately, and the fact that there are what are called silent Trump voters, or shy. They call them shy Trump voters who support him but are too embarrassed to state in public that they support him.
So Trump would be hoping on and betting on a rush of those shy voters or silent voters on election day, which has started the 3rd of November, because a lot of the early voting has already happened. We'll come to what kind of leanings would those voters who've gone in for an early vote have, as opposed to those who are voting on the main election day, that is the 3rd of November. But before that, you mentioned Florida, Ambassador Shankar. Let me bring that state in discussion with Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. Florida seesaw has been quite interesting in US presidential politics because it is the biggest swing state. Besides that, it swings between major parties. Bill Clinton won in 1996, then Bush in 2000 and 2004, then again back to Obama in 2008, 2012, and then to Trump in 2016, and now it is up for grabs. It's also a bellwether state, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. From 1964 to 2016, barring one instance, it's reflected the mood of the nation. So quite a few eyes would also be on what Florida votes for, isn't it?
Very much so. And without winning Florida, it is almost impossible to enter the White House. Such is the importance of Florida. And the best part is that the margins are very thin of late. I was looking at the stat, and in 2016, President Trump won by, or his margin was about 112,000. This time, things seem to be changing. One, because the early vote in Florida has been at a record high. And if you look at the 2016 vote, actual vote, 92% of that figure has been covered already by the early vote, and that was the figure 2 days ago. It would have gone further. There is anger amongst and Florida has a population which is elderly, and they are a sizable chunk. They are quite upset with the handling of the coronavirus, about the kind of discord that has entered the society. While the margin of error is about plus minus 3%, and Joe Biden has a very thin lead, Florida could produce an upset. And but the challenge again is, as you were discussing earlier with my co-panelists, is the how big is going to be the lead that Joe Biden has. If the lead is less than 3%, 4%, then that can be overturned by the Electoral College. But generally, the pundits believe that if the lead is about 5%, either candidate has, then the possibility of the Electoral College overturning that is not very high. One or two other points I would like to make is we were discussing about the shrinking lead of Joe Biden. At the moment, it is believed that overall in the swing states, the lead is merely 2.9%. So that poses a bit of a challenge. Although he is ahead in important states like Florida, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan.
Right.
But the 2.9% lead can go either way. And his overall lead has also shrunk to 6.5%.
Right.
So that is how it is evolving. And it promises to be quite an exciting evening. Or an exciting 1 or 2 days ahead.
Right. More on that, Ambassador Vishnu. Prakash, if I can come to you, Ambassador Meera Shankar, again. Talking about swing states, if you talk about Pennsylvania for a moment, to what extent do these different swing states influenced by various issues? I was particularly looking at the energy factor, the energy issue, climate change issue, and the issue of fracking that was a point of contention between the two candidates. Pennsylvania, potential job losses if a decision is taken on banning fracking. How do you see that also taking a center stage, the issue and also particularly the state?
Well, I think Joe Biden has clarified.
He's clarified, of course, yeah.
He has clarified that he's not going to stop the existing fracking, which is going on, but may not give licenses on government land for new fracking. So it's a question of additional, not losing the jobs that they already have. You know, you take Florida, the issues are very different for different sections of the population. The pensioners, as mentioned by Vishnu, have healthcare uppermost in their mind and are unhappy with the way Trump has handled the virus, which they feel has left them very exposed. The Cuban Americans who are conservative, and because of Trump, you know, breaking relations with Cuba, which is what they want, would go with the Republicans. Then you have the Puerto Ricans who are very pro-democratic. So there is a mixed population, and that's why Florida becomes a bellwether, because different elements in the population have different interests and different approaches. So all these issues will certainly come into play. Now, the 2.9% lead that Vishnu talked of is not uniform. In some of the big states, such as Michigan, Biden has an over 5-point lead. In Wisconsin, he has a very comfortable lead. It is in some of the other states that he has less. Now, if you look at the overall picture, not just the battleground states, then Biden has the support of the traditional liberal states along the East Coast and the West Coast. These are more wealthy and outward looking states, which are more integrated with the global economy. Trump has the support of the southern states and some of the mountain states, some of the states in the Midwest, particularly the rural states. Then the battleground states come into play after the core support that each of the candidates has. And here, as I said, the thing is that in some of the states, the lead is very thin and they've been seesawing. But in some of these states, Biden has had a comfortable lead. Trump has not had a comfortable lead in any of the battleground states. Yes, he is ahead in Iowa. He's ahead in Ohio. These are the two which have been definitely with Trump. And of course, Texas. But even those states which voted Republican last time have, like Georgia or Arizona or Florida, have been seesawing to some extent with Biden's lead fluctuating, sometimes going up above 2%, sometimes coming below 1%. And in some of them now, particularly like North Carolina, Trump is shown as being ahead by 0.5 percentage points. So when you average the lead, it looks small, but it's not uniformly distributed across all the states. And therefore, the effort by each candidate is really to swing some of those states which have larger electoral colleges. You know, as was mentioned, California is the largest, that would go normally Democrat.
Yes.
Texas is the second largest, which generally goes Republican. But this time the Democrats have been putting up a good fight, though it is expected to stay with the Republicans. Then you have Florida, then you have New York and Pennsylvania. These are the biggies which have the largest number of electoral college voters. So I think the concentration of the candidates is really in ensuring that these battleground states with the which have more electoral college votes should go towards them.
Absolutely. I understand, Ambassador Meera Shankar, that you have to leave us at this point in time. But thank you so much for your very, very valuable inputs on the US presidential elections. So, Shubhendu, battleground states are going to decide this election. Like in the past, they've decided so many elections. And
Absolutely.
the last time we saw such last-minute upsets with Trump winning mostly all the battleground states, and that totally changed the tide from what people.
And go back to 2016, 17, Hillary Clinton had about 3 million more popular votes as compared to Trump, but he swept the smaller states, and most of them are battleground state. And that was a crucial strategy and aspect. Let's see how it's going to turn up this time. Dr. Harinder Sekon, if I can come to you, ma'am. We look at the two candidates, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. How do you see them positioning against each other? Evolution of Donald Trump in 2016. He had that sort of, if I may use the word, charm of an outsider, not representing the political class, so to say. Tweets in the middle of the night, like many people do. So a more relatable factor, this lethargy with bureaucracy, with the political class, was something we saw in the elevation of Donald Trump as a president. But 4 years down, how has governance evolved Donald Trump? How has Donald Trump, in effect, lost his sort of, left his mark on his form of governance? How do you see the evolution of the two candidates?
His support base remains very strong. It's unshakable, and they feel that he's done a great job, and especially both domestically till the coronavirus struck, and the US is facing a lot of challenges. But if you speak to his, if you look at the analysis which are coming out of the United States, the domestic polls, etc., his voter base, especially the white male supporters, that 40% core support base which he has in the middle belt, that is still unshakably Trump. And he was doing pretty well till the COVID struck, because the US economy was looking up, jobs had come back, job growth had taken place. And I think especially people were happy with his hard line against China, which they felt would bring manufacture back to the United States and shore up jobs further within the country. Coming to his other outreach in foreign affairs, Americans don't really look at foreign affairs, but they feel that his policy has been successful in trying the outreach to North Korea, and especially the Middle East. West Asia is where they feel that he's been successful and he's been very effective. But of course, the detractors, but all this changed with the outbreak of the virus. And this is where the Democrats have had their chance to hit out at Trump, because initially he dismissed COVID as a minor flu. And he, when the numbers were going very high, and especially what happened in New York when the pandemic was raging, and I think disbursal of aid was lopsided, and people felt that the wherever there were Democrat governors, those states did not get the desired aid at the right time. So the COVID challenge is a very real challenge. But initially, if you look at the domestic politics, even Biden's responses to the COVID challenge were very slow. And it took him 4 days to set up his communication mechanism to start challenging Trump. Because Biden, if you remember, has been out of office, out of Washington, D.C. for the last 4 years of the Trump presidency. So this was a big disadvantage with which Biden started. But he has caught up, and I think the Biden campaign has picked up and done remarkably well in the last couple of months, especially after he won the Democrat nomination. Again, I think it's going to be the issues. Biden is seen as more soft, somebody who's going to reach out and play the role better of recovery and reconciliation.
Yes.
Because I think in America, the elections are not so much about foreign policy. And because of COVID, it's going to be, the social divide within the American society and American fabric, this Black Lives Matter movement. Now, these are going to impact, these are the things which are going to impact Trump, especially in the swing states like Pennsylvania, which has a lot of Latinos and
people of color.
African Americans living over there.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to recovery and reconciliation, Trump has been very moderate, but people feel that Biden's approach would be a softer approach. He would try to reach across the different segments of society all across the United States. Trump, of course, has also been talking about making America great again, but seems more abrasive, runs his policy through tweets. His establishment has seen a lot of changes, and people feel that Biden is going to be bring in a more stable administration. But I think it's going to be extremely close, as has been pointed out by my co-panelists. It's going to be a very close election.
Absolutely. So very divergent approaches, if I may say, on a number of issues. Different campaign styles, totally different personalities. We've seen that kind of contrast, which is difficult to miss. Well, let me introduce another panelist who's joining us, Ambassador Mohankumar, Chairman RIS think tank in Delhi. He's a Dean International Affairs and Professor at Jindal Global University and former Indian Ambassador to France. Welcome, Ambassador Mohankumar, to this special broadcast. A host of issues that matter in this election were spoken about by Dr. Sikho. Do you think that the most divisive and also perhaps decisive is the COVID-19 pandemic, the way Donald Trump has handled it all this while, and now Joe Biden saying that the day he comes to office, he'll come up with a comprehensive plan to beat this pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's, thank you very much for having me. I think that's a fair point to make. In the last 2 or 3 months, I think the Democrats have had a door slightly ajar, and it's helped them make a comeback. So they have latched on to COVID in a very big way. And the fact that the United States, which is known as the richest country in the world, the most powerful country in the world, perhaps the most, the only superpower apart from China, and for a country like United States to still have the largest infections, the largest deaths per million, that is unacceptable, frankly, for a lot of people. And that has got tied into the other issue of Obamacare and the fact that a lot of people don't have healthcare insurance in the United States. So a lot of angst and anger against that aspect. But for me, the important thing you have to see, I was listening to the commentary that you were having with one of the panelists, and one of the things that you'll have to see is whether the women defect from Donald Trump. Last time he was able to get all the white voters who did not have college education as usual, the Trump constituency, but also the women who voted for Trump. For me, that I think will be the defining factor. Are women going to desert Donald Trump and vote for Biden?
Because Biden coalition focuses a lot on the women, youth, the elderly, the college graduates who are whites there. So Joe Biden has been very, very assiduously trying to woo the women voter constituency there, which, like you said, Donald Trump managed to win last time around in 2016. So you are saying that the shift of women voters, if that happens from Trump to Biden, could prove one of the most decisive factors in this election?
For me, yes. I mean, the fact of the matter is you've got a very strange system where the popular vote counts, but only counts to a certain extent. And it's all down to the 6 battleground states of Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Arizona. I've just done a quick calculation. These 6 battleground states have about 105 Electoral College seats. And in these battleground states, women will count a lot more than in other places. And that is why I think that, plus the fact that 100 million people have voted already in this election. Remember last time in 2016, the total number of votes cast in the United States was 133 million. And 100 million have already voted in the United States election in 2020. So if you apply that logic, then I think Joe Biden is in with a very strong chance. But it's hard to say until, the votes are counted, and then you will have to see. I think the earliest indication you will get is Florida, because Pennsylvania will take time because of the mail-in ballots and so on. So Florida will give you some idea.
But Arizona has started the counting already.
Sorry?
Arizona has started the counting already.
Yes, Arizona is important too. But for me, going by the number of Electoral College seats, Florida is 29.
Yes.
Arizona is only 11. Well, 11 is important too. But I think Florida with 29 seats, by tomorrow morning, you will have a very good idea which way the wind is blowing, I think.
Right. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, if I can bring in the theme of the COVID pandemic that sort of rages on even while this election takes place. The manner in which President Donald Trump handled it, denying it initially, getting infected himself, and then saying that, look at me, I'm a strong man, I can survive it, so can America. Wearing masks when it was absolutely necessary. These also sort of distinguish the manner in which the two candidates stand. One, a strong man sort of air, says that with strength we can take on every challenge. The other saying, no, it's important to listen to science, believe in science and do what the doctors say. So we see Donald Trump at loggerheads with the medical experts in the US as well.
Including Anthony Fauci.
Absolutely. And that sort of distinguishes the kind of candidates the two are.
Well, President Donald Trump is pretty even-handed. He's at loggerheads with practically everybody. And even
in his own administration as well.
His own administration and his cabinet colleagues, basically it's almost like a musical chair or a revolving door.
Yeah.
But that is his personality. Coming back to COVID, he unfortunately took it very casually. Not only that, he, as you mentioned, he endangered the health of the Secret Service, people around him, And even when he was in the hospital, we will all recall, he came out of the hospital while he was still having the virus and sat into a limo and started waving at the crowds.
Yes.
He has said things which are beyond belief, to say that spray a disinfectant in your throat. Even his rallies have been a source of spread of COVID. It is believed that till Saturday, at least 30,000 new COVID cases happened. At least 30,000 people were infected because of his rallies. Contrast that with the attitude of Joe Biden, who has not addressed a large rally, and he has been very, very careful. That is something that will haunt him. To what extent, I do not know. But, and even in his voter base, when Mohan talks about, very rightly, the disenchantment of the white American women, and that was a strong constituency. One of the reasons that the white women are quite upset is COVID, the handling of COVID. They are getting affected. So it is unfortunate that in a country like the US, with all the facilities that are available, they have been at the receiving end because of the casual approach of the leader who refuses to wear a mask, which is the bare essential, and many others follow suit. So that is one thing that Joe Biden has promised to correct as soon as possible.
Ambassador Prakash, another important issue besides the handling of COVID-19 has been the state of the economy. It was Donald Trump's trump card before COVID-19 struck. And, we've seen how the state of the economy has been, especially after COVID. Also, there have been three, if I'm correct, legislations that have been passed by the US Congress, and there's another one which is in waiting, and there is a back and forth in terms of allegations going on between Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi. Well, on the state of the economy, how do you rate the way Donald Trump has managed over the past 4 years, and who do you think the investors would be backing in this election there?
Well, that is a bit of a paradox, which I have spoken to so many people and find it slightly difficult to comprehend. Somehow, in all the opinion polls, President Trump scored much better in terms of handling the economy, and people seem to have more confidence in his ability to handle the economy. And he has indeed been very strong in some areas, in the sectors area of trade, in the area of onshoring, to crack down on American multinationals which were doing businesses abroad, to decouple with China, etc., etc. Now, but at the same time, the economic pain in the middle class, in the lower middle class, is quite widespread. So there is a lot of concern, and we all remember, he constituted committees to advise him and to help him kickstart the engines of economic growth, and one by one, people pulled out. So the economy is not doing well, although today the challenge is very different, and that is again very interesting. Right. There is so much of cash floating around, and the stock market has gotten de-linked somehow with the economic performance. Right.
So, we'll talk about the economic aspect a little more, sir. There's a tweet that has come in from Joe Biden. If you can take a look at that first. Joe Biden has tweeted a short while back, in 2008, he says, in 2008 and 2012, you placed your trust in me to help lead this country alongside Barack Obama. There's a tweet by Joe Biden. He says, today I'm asking for your trust once again, this time in Kamala and me, Kamala Harris, the vice presidential candidate. He says, we can heal the soul of this nation. I promise we won't let you down. And to look at the context of presidential candidate Joe Biden's tweet message, Amrit Pal Singh, a colleague, joins us again. Amrit, once again, Joe Biden is invoking the legacy of Barack Obama, two terms of governance. How do you interpret his tweet?
Well, he's basically appealing, Shubhendu, to his voters to the Democratic voters that he's invoking Barack Obama's tenure where he was vice president,
Yes.
and saying that those are the days we want to wish to bring back. You saw in the campaign time also it was Barack Obama campaigning extensively for Joe Biden. So basically, I think using in a very subtle way what, of course, the democratic values that the party stands for, Barack Obama's administration, pitting it against Donald Trump's administration, and also, in my opinion, appealing to bringing in race here as well.
Yes.
Because both Kamala and Barack Obama are people who come from the Afro-American community, and though the Afro-American community has traditionally been Democratic supporters, voters, but in this election, after the Black Lives Matter movement and accusations leveled by the Democrats against Donald Trump's administration and Donald Trump himself personally, I think he's using this without actually saying that. So I think this tweet could be understood, today's tweet, while the Americans vote, could be understood in that perspective. Shivendu?
Yeah, absolutely. Building on what you said, Amrit, this is a reference to the social unrest that we've been seeing in the United States. You mentioned the Black Lives Matter protest, and he's been saying in his presidential debates and in his campaigns that we are for the United States of America. It is not about red, it is not about blue, he says, we are united. So he's making a pitch of unity, but it's interesting that he did not talk about Trump's what he calls mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic in his first tweet on election day. He chose to talk about his tenure as VP under Barack Obama and what those 8 years really stood for. And he chooses the issue of social unrest and unity over other issues. Many thought the big elephant in the room was COVID-19, but now we are seeing that he is trying to send out a positive message, an aspirational message in this tweet, isn't it?
That's right, Munmun. I think you've rightly analyzed it, that COVID-19 is something which is there. It has been extensively talked about in the campaign with, President Trump almost sounding, as if he's defending his position, but on the defensive, but the Democrats being very aggressive and saying that he's clearly mishandled it. But today, as the Americans vote, what Joe Biden is trying to do is trying to invoke Barack Obama's legacy and say that, look, in his administration I was the vice president, this is what we stood for. If you want to bring back those days, vote for us, go out America, vote for us. And when he says unity, he's basically appealing to people who might not be traditional voters or the of the Democratic Party, or maybe the undecided vote. So that's what he's trying to appeal at by sending a message of unity, while he's invoking Barack Obama and the Democratic Party's administration. But he's also widening his appeal and trying to say that be united. It's not about red or blue. Vote, and that's what the good days of America stand for, and I promise you we'll bring you that. So I think that's what his tweet is trying to do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Amrit, for putting this tweet by Joe Biden as first on November 3, the main election day, into perspective. And we'll take a breather at this point in time, but do stay tuned to DD India, because this is the place that has got you fully covered on the US presidential elections.
And we wait how soon does Donald Trump tweet and follow with that. Take a break. We'll just be back.
सर आपका केवाईसी अपडेट करना है, नहीं तो अकाउंट और एटीएम कार्ड ब्लॉक हो जाएगा।
सावधान सावधान, 2.5 करोड़ का इनाम मुझे। देखिए, अनजाने कॉल्स, फर्जी ईमेल्स, लिंक्स और जाली ऐप से अपना पिन, ओटीपी, पासवर्ड कभी भी किसी के साथ शेयर न करें। आप रहेंगे सावधान तो नहीं होगा नुकसान। आरबीआई कहता है, जानकार बनिए, सतर्क रहिए।
इस दिवाली अपनों के लिए जगह बनाओ, खुशियों के लिए जगह बढ़ाओ। LIC Housing Finance wishes you a happy and safe Diwali. Stay safe, move on.
Insightful opinion. incisive analysis, intelligent conversation. Watch the best minds from India and the US decode the US election for you. Join us for a 14-hour live coverage of the race for the White House. From 6 p.m. on November 3, only on DD India, A Billion Voices.
Welcome back. You're watching a special broadcast in the US presidential elections, and this is the most comprehensive coverage that you'll find of the US presidential elections anywhere. We've got you totally covered. We have our reporters joining us from the United States over the next 14 hours or so. Besides that, we have our domain experts and subject specialists who will be putting things into perspective for us. And joining us is now a correspondent, Nina Potts, joins us from Washington, D.C. Well, good morning to you there in America, Nina. It's nice to have you. We can see the White House behind you. Now, first, let's start with an update on the polling. It started with New Hampshire. Where all has it started other than that?
Well, polls have opened up and down the East Coast. Of course, the polls are staggered across America's time zone. Most polls opening between 6 and 7 and 8 a.m. local, and closing between 7, 8 and 9 local time. But of course, the last votes to be in will be on the West Coast. Although this is an election like no other, 100 million people have already cast their votes. That represents more than 2/3 of the total ballots cast in 2016. With Joe Biden showing at least a narrow lead in 6 of the most important swing states, looking at Arizona and North Carolina and Florida, Pennsylvania and Michigan. And of course, Pennsylvania and Florida is where President Trump really needs to close the gap. But millions of Americans today making it through the pandemic to vote in person.
Right, Nina Potts, correspondent, getting us update from Washington, D.C. Nina, there's an obvious political excitement around the elections, but there's also an eerie nervousness at potential violence that may erupt in the heart of oldest democracy. There's been a spike in gun purchase, we understand. We've seen visuals of shops being sealed. What's going on, if you could give us the bigger picture there?
Well, of course, we've had a summer of protests in the U.S., mainly over racial divisions in this country. And you're right to say that America is also a pretty heavily armed nation. I think tensions are very high. It feels very different from previous elections. Americans, I think, are nervous. Many are angry. And under President Trump, over the past 4 years, America has become deeply divided and quite polarized. We spoke to people in Washington, D.C., where I am last night, and they're certainly braced for protests. An unscalable fence has gone up around the White House, and it's been widely reported. I'm sure you've seen pictures of shop fronts and businesses boarded up here in Washington, D.C., as in many cities across America.
Mm-hmm. And the focus continues to be on the battleground states. We saw both sides doing last-ditch campaigning there in the battleground states. Can these states make and break the election?
Well, it is still pretty narrow. President Trump has a 1 in 10 chance of clearing a way back to the White House. Joe Biden is definitely coming out in the polls, has come out in the polls in the lead. If you look at some of these swing states, I have the percentage breakdown here for you, and they're pretty close. Overall, Biden is leading 50% to Trump's 46%, but in some states like Florida, it's increasingly close, and that is tightening at Biden 51% and Trump at 48%. And we've seen already that with mail-in votes, it's razor thin in Florida, with 66% of registered Democrats having voted already and 65% of Republicans saying that they've already voted in Florida. So razor thin. And there are two, I think, key states that President Trump would have to win in order to clear his path to the presidency. That would be Florida and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, where he's already stated that he will legally challenge the vote counting, which will go beyond at the end of Election Day, at the end of tonight, for another 3 days. In Pennsylvania, as in some other states, because every state has its own rules, and Republicans, I think, feel quite disappointed that they've not been able to limit expanded voting options in the middle of a pandemic.
Right, Nina, and how do we interpret that? The record early voting, postal ballot, what could be the possible implications of that on the elections?
Well, I think President Trump and the Trump campaign are worried that the majority of those early votes and mail-in ballots have been Democrats. And if you look at the numbers, you know, nearly 100 million people have voted already. The suggestion and the consensus there is that people don't vote early and make the effort to vote unless they are motivated to call for change. Republicans also have a history through this pandemic of being less worried about conditions, social distancing, and they're expected to turn out in person in greater numbers than Democrats. And one of the reasons that President Trump wants to shut down late counting and delayed votes is that he is also worried that those mail-in votes will go to the Democrats. So that's, you know, perhaps a snapshot of some of the implications of the mail-in votes.
Nina, are we all who are observing the US presidential elections and eventually the outcomes going to be in for a long haul? This is not going to get over, it seems, in a matter of days. It might take weeks. Last time around in 2016, the picture was clear only in December, and considering the kind of statements that Donald Trump has made, that he'll be moving court in Pennsylvania and in other places, in Wisconsin perhaps they've already won in one of the courts in their bid to ensure that, you know, mail-in ballots are not counted beyond a point, and there may be a further challenge from Democrats. So this is not going to end anytime soon, it seems.
No, and I think one of the anomalies of the US system, the election cycle, is of course that the incumbent president, whether he wins or loses, gets another 3 months in the White House before the new president is sworn in the inauguration in January. And President Trump has already made it clear that he intends to make some changes whether he stays or goes, including on Sunday night at a rally in Florida. He basically hinted that he would fire the nation's top infectious diseases experts, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Yes. So President Trump, I think there's a big question over what he might try and dismantle between now and January. But you're quite right that we're expecting, I think, a protracted legal battle. Both sides have said clearly that they're lawyering up. President Trump has even gone as far in a fairly unambiguous way to say that as soon as Election Day is over, he's taking his lawyers and going straight in. Yes. I do think that if Joe Biden wins, one thing to bear in mind is that we might not see the levels of euphoria that we saw in 2008 when President Obama won. President Trump's legacy over the last 4 years has been one of division, and I think it's going to be extremely difficult for any new president. Joe Biden may find it extremely difficult to unify the country and to heal the country. I think America's revealed itself to have a lot of deep-seated issues and to be pretty broken.
Right, and if you were to address the elephant in the room, Nina, one point about the pandemic, in what manner is it playing out as an issue, and also the challenge in the voting process? We can see visuals of voters, officials all wearing masks and going through the polling.
Well, you're quite right. I mean, the pandemic is almost the single biggest issue in this election, and it's really worked against President Trump. But so too is the economy. And on the economy, President Trump is claiming victory. He continues to score highly on the economy. And his narrative is that America has made a much quicker economic recovery post-pandemic than anybody expected. Joe Biden, on the other hand, tells quite a different story. He talks of a country that is in deep depression. President Trump accuses Joe Biden of planning to put the country in a series of consecutive national lockdowns if he wins. And President Trump, to some extent, has made good on his promise to keep the economy going and to make sure that it doesn't shut down completely through the pandemic. And he attributes that pledge that he came good on to an economy that has recovered more quickly. However, jobs are going to be a key issue in this election because so many jobs have been lost during the pandemic. And then, of course, there's the physical challenge of voting itself. As you say, people having to fight their way through the pandemic, put on their masks and queue up for hours at polling stations in order to cast their votes. There are also other dynamics. Some communities have been harder hit by the pandemic than others, especially the African American community. President Trump is on course to win less than 15% of the African American vote. They have been overwhelmingly hit by the pandemic, so that has also played in, I think, into the way the votes will be cast.
Nina, stay with us. We'll come back to you. Ambassador Mohankumar, a correspondent, has touched upon a number of issues. One issue which would be bothering many of the observers would be how long is this process going to continue of counting before the outcome is clear, before all of us, considering that Donald Trump has said that he's going in with his lawyers, he would be filing lawsuits against the counting of mail-in ballots. He's already lost those in Pennsylvania and North Carolina, but he's won in a court in Wisconsin, and he's looking at more states as well. So if this is a close election, this could take much longer than what many are anticipating, isn't it?
Think everybody has
it's going to be very protracted indeed, and it'll be very interesting to see what undecided voters do in this election.
Come back to
very
you,
different,
taking
I think,
a view
from
on what
2016.
you've said from one of our panelists.
Okay, thank you. So I think what you can rule out is a Trump landslide. Almost no poll is talking about that. There is still a small chance that Joe Biden gets such an unbeatable lead by the end of, let's say, tomorrow, day after, and then it's all over. But I still think that is a very slim possibility. Every indication seems to be that the race is tightening and that we will have a long haul. What really is striking, as I was saying earlier, you had only 139 million people who voted last time, and 100 million people have already voted before today in the US elections. The total number of persons who can vote is only 239. So 100 million people have already voted. Now, given the conventional wisdom that most people who vote before election day in two ways, I mean, there are two ways in which you can vote. One is a drop ballot or a drop-in ballot. The other is absentee voting. I don't think anybody is saying anything against the drop-in ballot. What Mr. Trump and his legal team is saying is, in terms of absentee ballots, there are two or three things. One, somebody has to check that they are authentic. So the first thing is it comes in the relevant, proper envelope. You open the envelope, and then you've got officials who need to check whether your signature is authentic. And in some states, you need an ID or a photo ID to say that you are the person who's voting. The problem is, you have two problems, infrastructure problems. One, the mailing system has been slowed down, somewhat deliberately, I have to say. So it's going to take much longer for the mail-in ballots to come. Secondly, there aren't enough officials, I think, to handle such a big number of absentee ballots. And then on top of it, Mr. Trump says that if there are some states like Pennsylvania where actually you can count the ballots or the absentee ballots up to 3 days after today.
Right.
He's saying no.
Right.
He's saying no, everything has to stop today. So you've got a whole panoply of issues which will land up in the Supreme Court.
And we'll have to wait and watch how that pans out. Sir, once again, if we can go across to Washington, D.C., Nina Potts, our correspondent, is there. Nina, we were talking about the pandemic. Now, if we talk about the impact of it, the economic impact of it, before the pandemic, Trump could use the green shoots in the economy to his advantage as his achievement. But now, world economy, American economy, they're all impacted. How are the people of America looking at this economic debacle due to the pandemic? Do they blame the administration for it? What responses, what voices have you been tracking?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that Americans who've lost their jobs are very scared. As you know, Americans don't have a history of saving. They don't have a history of making ends meet particularly well from one month to another, certainly people that are not high earners. And now that people are hemorrhaging jobs and losing their jobs, I think people in America are very scared. It's worth taking a look at the pandemic numbers. 9.1 million Americans that have tested positive. Nearly 250,000 Americans have died. Those numbers do not look good for President Trump. On the other hand, stepping back a minute, with the pandemic having come back with such force in Europe, talk of President Trump's mishandling of the pandemic, I think that Americans are looking to Europe, certainly Republicans, and saying, well, hang on a second, all these governments all around the world, particularly in Europe, haven't handled the pandemic particularly well either. I mean, in terms of the economic recovery, Joe Biden has walked into a bit of a minefield by suggesting that he wants to transition away from fossil fuels. The question of fracking has played very big in states like Pennsylvania, which are heavily reliant on fracking, and Joe Biden clearly has a huge climate change agenda, which President Trump has mocked him for. So the narrative that we're hearing from the Trump campaign has been that President Trump, as I say, has made good on his promise to keep the economy going, even at the risk of American lives.
Yes, and in the last few seconds, I'll just press in one small question. Would request a 10-second answer from you. Where are the two contenders?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Where are the two contenders? Where are the two candidates? Is Mr. Trump in White House? And is Joe Biden in Delaware, his home state? Where are the two today?
Where are they? Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, President Trump, I mean, we were expecting him to go down to Florida at one point to his home in Mar-a-Lago, but in fact, he has decided to watch Election Day from the White House, and he's got a watch party tonight with 400 invitees. The optics of that, as you can imagine, suggest that he's not planning or wanting to leave the White House anytime soon. And Joe Biden is very focused on Pennsylvania, clearly because I think as a swing state, it's increasingly apparent that it's crucial in this election.
Absolutely, Nina. Thank you so much. And as you were speaking, we are showing to our viewers voting or polling that is underway in Florida. It's a bellwether state. It is a swing state or a battleground state. A lot is decided by Florida usually in election after election. It could turn out to be true this time around as well. Thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us, Nina, from Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. And strategic expert Dr. Harinder Sekon continues to be with us. Dr. Sekon, we're talking about the economy, the impact on the economy due to the pandemic, but that may not be the only evaluation that the Americans have of Donald Trump's achievements. If you were to talk about that, the trade war against China made a lot of headlines in the recent years. Although there hasn't been any resolution, but the fact that Donald Trump took a resolute stand and made it an issue for the world, for America, for China to look at, do you think that makes a difference? Again, adding to his image of a strong man, calling it shots, pointing out the problem where it lies?
The China issue was a very major campaign issue for Trump in 2016. But this time, because of what he's already taken steps to bring China, make China play by the rules as much as possible, and he's unleashed the trade war. So the electorate is now looking at, they think that it could be responsible for some of the jobs coming back to the United States, but that has all been negated by the impact of the COVID. So China and the trade war is not really a campaign issue. The voter in America is actually bothered more about jobs on the ground. How does the economic regeneration help them find a job, have a more comfortable life, access to health care? Now, these are the issues which impact the American voter much more than China or the trade war with India or America's coming out of multilateral trade agreements.
If I may add here, Dr. Sikko, one
those
point that
things
Trump
are
repeatedly
important because
makes in his rallies and in his presidential debate, he said that as well, that he has brought jobs back from China to America. He's got various American companies that have set up base in China to come back and settle in the United States. So is this an issue that is impacting the electorate and the people in general in the United States? Will that also be a factor as they decide who to vote for?
This is just maybe one of the factors, but I would not say that the jobs coming back from China is the only factor which is going to impact the outcome of the elections. Of course, Trump has been very harsh and critical on China, and this has been, people are watching Joe Biden as well, and Joe Biden has made statements that he is, he's also said that China is a challenge to US authority and globally. But that is more in the strategic domain, what Biden has been talking about, because Trump has actually called him Beijing Biden, because Biden he views as having taken a soft policy towards China when he was vice president. But coming back to Trump, he himself, the Democrat campaign has come out with Trump's business dealings with China, some of those which he had kept away from the focus of the electorate, and he had not declared some businesses which he was doing with China. So it's a mixed bag. So China factor is not the only factor which is going to impact the outcome of this election. There are a lot of, but it's the overall economic downturn which has taken place because of COVID, his responses to COVID, his policies on immigration. Now, those are the policies which are also going to have an equal impact on the outcome of the election, because America has a sizable number of Hispanics. And that is the vote which is going to be important in one of the votes, one segment in Florida, along with the vote of the women electorate. So, so his stand and Black Lives Matter, because even in Pennsylvania, there's been so much of, you can see the social divide which has taken place in America and over Black lives. So now those are the issues which probably has had voters come out in larger numbers because, it remains to be seen, because when Barack Obama won, it was Black voters who came out in very large numbers. And we see that once again, they're coming out in very large numbers to cast their vote. So those are the kind of issues collectively which will play a very important role in the outcome of this election. It's going to be close, as I mentioned earlier. The China factor is important, but not the only factor which is going to impact the outcome of this election. It is basically, who is going to offer better, who's been more forthcoming in laying out, charting out a course for recovery, reconciliation, healing the social fabric of the United States. Now, those are the kind of issues which at this time the voter is worried about, those issues more than just one country.
Right. Dr. Mohankumar, I find it quite fascinating when Dr. Sikko emphasizes on how Americans are more concerned about domestic issues. They don't worry as much about the foreign relations, about relations with China. Dr. Kumar, the truth is that the world is very eagerly watching, waiting to see who takes the White House next. So what are the implications on a global stage, implications of who's the next man in the White House? Because Donald Trump has very differently treated his friends and foes as compared to his previous administrations, the other American administrations. So how do you see, how's the world, international community looking at the developments in America?
So it's one of those ironies, and I quite agree with Dr. Sikko that I think the average Joe or Jill in the United States is not extremely concerned about foreign policy. But the fact of the matter is that if whether Joe Biden wins or Trump wins is going to make a huge difference to the international order, frankly. I mean, we have a liberal international order which is on its last deathbed, I would say. There is nothing else to take its place. So we're going to have three kinds of repercussions depending on whether Trump wins or Biden wins. One is America's attitude towards multilateralism and its commitment to international organizations like WTO, the United Nations, and the WHO. So that's the first implication. If you're going to have Trump, you can say goodbye to all these international organizations. It's as good as not having United States in them. A second term, Trump is likely to be more unshackled. He has nothing to look forward to except his legacy. So he is not going to be shackled either by the Senate or the Congress. So that's the first implication. The second implication, I would say, it's for transatlantic relationship. I've heard when I visited Paris and London, both Germany, France, UK, they say, listen, we can put up with 4 years, we can look at it as an aberration, but it's very hard for us to put up with 8 years. The European continent then will have to find its own ways and means of standing independently in foreign policy. They have to forget about the transatlantic relationship and the dependence on the United States. If Biden comes, something can be done to repair the relationship. So the second broad implication is for the transatlantic relationship. The third important dimension is obviously ties with China. I think, frankly, while Biden had to do a certain amount of election rhetoric to match Trump in terms of not portraying himself as Beijing Biden, he has tried very hard, and I think he has succeeded. China is not a big election issue, except that Donald Trump keeps saying that this virus is a China virus. And if it was not for the China virus, I would have done much better. And the Trump constituency seems to be giving him a free pass on that. So the relationship with China will change substantially if Biden becomes president, because his approach is to rein in China, not to confront in a way that, you take it to a kind of catastrophe. His point is, he will say, okay, let's make rules in the WTO to tackle Chinese state subsidies.
Yes,
to
if I may, if you allow me, Ambassador Mohankumar, Biden is saying that let's rein in China through a coalition of countries. So that is one point that he's emphasizing on quite a lot during his campaign. Having said that, what does Trump 2.0 or a Biden presidency mean as far as relationship between India and the United States is concerned, in the strategic sphere, in the economic sphere, in Indo-Pacific as a whole?
And Munmun, if I may just add in, Trump said that if Biden wins, China is going to own United States. So that's sort of a contradiction.
Yeah, well, let me respond to Ms. Munmun Sen's question about implications for India, because that's pretty important. We are all in India after all. I think, frankly, in areas such as defense, strategic, science, technology, energy, I would not see much of a difference. So you've just signed the Baker Foundation Agreement. No country would sign a foundation agreement 2 weeks before the election. So it's a great indication that there is bipartisan consensus in the United States, at least with regard to the defense relationship with India. The Quad will continue. I don't see any change there with Joe Biden. So that is not an issue. Science and technology, we are doing great things. That will not change. Energy, we've started buying a lot of crude oil from the United States, and that is not going to change because we have reduced our dependence on Iran primarily because of the United States request, but the US has stepped in. And the US and Saudi Arabia supply a lot of oil, so the energy relationship is not going to change. So what is going to change? I think the first thing that will change if Mr. Biden becomes president is climate change. United States will be part of the Paris Accord, and we will definitely come under some broad pressure to cut down coal consumption for electricity. Okay, China too will come under much, much higher pressure, but India too. So that is the first area where there will be a change. The biggest change I foresee is in the area of trade, intellectual property, and investment. There, I think With Mr. Trump, it was more rhetoric, and that, you know, he has not really had a very detailed dialogue. The Biden administration will have to sit with us, and we will have to justify our position on trade, investment, intellectual property rights. So that is going to be a somewhat difficult issue. Traditionally, Democrats have not been shy of raising human rights concerns with India. So if they feel strongly about what we are doing in Kashmir, if they feel strongly about what is happening to pluralism in India, it will become part.
And so if I can just hold for a moment, there are some visuals coming in from Pennsylvania live. Democrat presidential nominee Joe Biden is going to attend Get Out and Vote events in Pennsylvania before he's expected to deliver remarks on election night outside of Chase Center in his hometown of Wilmington, Delaware. Those visuals of Joe Biden in Pennsylvania coming in live.
Absolutely. Pennsylvania is a swing state. It's going to be extremely important to the entire controversy over what he had said on fracking initially, and then the clarification that came in that he wants fracking banned only on federal lands. All that happened in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is also a place where there is a significant population of the Afro-American voters who are likely to play a very, very significant role in this election, like they did when Barack Obama was elected and re-elected. And of course, there weren't as many black supporters for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and perhaps you know, that was associated with a sense of complacency in the Democratic campaign there. So in other words, Pennsylvania, a very, very important place or state with 20 electoral college votes. So that's why Pennsylvania counts so much, and so much time has been spent over the last 7 days or so by both the candidates, Trump as well as Biden, in Pennsylvania. Let's go to Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, we've spoken about what this election could mean as far as India-United States ties are concerned. There's a broad view that in strategic terms and defense terms, there is not likely to be much change, but there is still a question mark on what really could happen as far as economic ties are concerned, because Trump has been very strident on trade, tariffs, etc. You know, having said that, the issue of terrorism is one issue on which Trump has been extremely tough on Pakistan. Do you expect a Biden presidency, if Biden is elected this time around, to be as tough? He's written an op-ed in which he's indicated that he's going to be tough on terrorism, but what do you think?
Before I talk about that, let us look at the broad picture. The best part of the relationship is that there is a cross-party consensus in both the countries.
Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, we'll be back with you. We are getting a live input. Our reporter is joining us. Nick Harper joins us from Delaware. Nick, good morning to you there in America.
Good morning to you.
You're in Delaware, that's the home state of Joe Biden. And this is one state that has been blue since 1992. It sends 3 electors to the Electoral College. Has voting begun there on the final day of voting?
It has, yeah. Here in Delaware, voting began a couple of hours ago. It'll extend for about another 10 hours from this point. There isn't expected to be any surprise here in Delaware. As you mentioned, it is a blue state and is likely to remain that way, especially as Joe Biden has made this state his home for almost 70 years. Wilmington, Delaware has been a long time home of the Bidens since he moved from Pennsylvania when he was just a young boy. So he's been here for the majority of his life. It's also Delaware, the state that he represented in the Senate for about 36 years. So many people in this local area know Joe Biden in one form or another. Wilmington, Delaware itself is not a big city. It's more of a large town in some respects. About 100,000 people live here. Joe Biden was out and about in Wilmington first thing this morning. He visited a church where his first wife, his daughter and also his son are all buried before he jumped on a plane to head to Pennsylvania, where he's going to be spending part of the day campaigning. 2 stops in Pennsylvania, a state that he feels is going to be a must-win state. It's likely to be the state which is won, the presidency is won or lost in. President Trump also wants to try and take Pennsylvania And I think it shows very much the importance of the state, the fact that Joe Biden has decided to go there on election day. It's also a state that he's visited several times during the course of the last week, including 3 times just yesterday.
Right, Nick. Also, broadly, if you were to talk to people in America, what kind of challenge does Joe Biden, as a perhaps more experienced politician than Hillary Clinton was in 2016-17, what kind of challenge does he offer to President Trump? What are the particular points of connection between Joe Biden and the masses?
Well, I think Joe Biden throughout this campaign has been trying to draw 2 very different visions of America. He's saying that under President Trump we would have another 4 years of anarchy, 4 years of problems. He's painted President Trump as a threat to America and to America's standing on the world stage with international partners. He, however, is trying to set out a very different vision and version of America if he were to be elected president. He says that he would be able to turn things around in terms of the economic fallout that we've seen from COVID-19. He feels that he would be able to heal a nation that is polarized and politically divided. He also thinks that he would be able to handle the pandemic much better than President Trump has. He says that President Trump's handling has essentially disqualified him from a second term in office. And he's also been pushing very hard on that experience button. He's had 47 years of public service as a US senator and then as vice president for 8 years under President Barack Obama. And he's also playing on this idea of empathy. He points to President Trump saying that he is a man who has no empathy, but he says that he himself, Joe Biden, has empathy. He's had tragedy in the past. He's lost very close family members, and he said that having experienced that tragedy sets him up well to be able to relate to the American people at a time that they are suffering from the pandemic and the economic fallout, that he would be not just their commander-in-chief but their counselor-in-chief. And that experience and that empathy are really 2 pillars that Joe Biden has been running on during this campaign, pushing to the American people, saying that he is the man for the job.
Nick, you are very closely tracking the Biden campaign. I want to ask from you that, considering that nearly every pre-poll survey and poll of polls suggests that there is a 7 to 8 point lead that Joe Biden enjoys over Donald Trump, would you say that there is a sense of assuredness in the Biden campaign, or would you say that there is some sort of nervousness and uncertainty that Donald Trump can make a last-minute comeback just like he did in 2016?
Well, I think the Joe Biden campaign are very much going into election day with a certain amount of confidence, a certain amount of optimism. That national lead by about 7 or 8% is a very strong lead, but it really comes down to the battleground states, and that's where he has a slightly narrower lead. In Pennsylvania by only a few percentage points. He has a stronger lead in, say, Michigan and Wisconsin, 2 states he's hoping to win back from President Trump. His lead there of about 5 or 6%. But I think there is that wariness as well, even though all the polls are suggesting that Joe Biden has that sizable advantage going into election day. There will be wariness because, yes, remember 2016, Hillary Clinton went into election day as the clear favourite to win the presidency, and we all know how that turned out. The political analysts who are surrounding the Biden campaign say that the polls are more robust this time, that they show a stronger advantage. They also show that Joe Biden has a higher likability factor than Hillary Clinton. That was one of her problems 4 years ago. But I think they will be very wary, and they're still doing all that they can on this election day to push the vote, to push as many people as they can to get to the ballot box. They're saying that every vote counts in what they're calling a fight for the soul of the nation.
Right, Nick. Also, do you see around you special security arrangements? Earlier, we were talking to Nina from Washington, D.C. We were discussing about a certain nervousness, about potential for violence that has been talked about. Any special arrangement to ensure that such an untoward incident does not happen by the administration?
Well, certainly here in Wilmington, Delaware, just behind me, you can see the stage. This is where Joe Biden will be later on tonight. He'll be addressing supporters here. And in this general area, there is a very large security perimeter fence that has been assembled over the last couple of days to ensure that no one without the proper credentials, without the right ticketing, can get into this area. Wilmington, Delaware, we haven't seen in the city centre any security precautions, but just 30 minutes away is the city of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, and we know that National Guard are already out on the streets there. We've seen shops and businesses boarded up. It is one of those big cities where there is some concern, like in Washington DC, like in New York City, like in Los Angeles, that if there is going to be any protests or any flare-up in violence, those are the type of places that it could happen. So there are already those precautions in place.
Nick, since you are tracking the Biden campaign very closely, what's your assessment of what the Biden campaign's assessment is of the kind of support they've got in terms of early voters so far? Because we've seen a record numbers have already voted. I'm not talking about Delaware alone, but the whole of the United States.
Well, yes, incredible numbers voted before Election Day. Nearly 100 million Americans, smashing records of the past. Potentially, we could see the highest electoral turnout in over a century. And the majority of those people who've been voting both in person and by mail are Democrats. They're seeing a broad range of people. They've got a very extensive coalition. People very much on the left with liberal ideas, communities of color, African Americans, Latino communities. They're also hoping to get more over 65s to steal some of that vote from President Trump. He did very well with them 4 years ago. And suburban women. That's a group that President Trump did very well last time, but we have seen a switch in opinion polls over the last few weeks, and more of them are heading towards the Democrat side, voting for Joe Biden. There just has been a little bit of nervousness, particularly in communities of color in the important swing state of Florida. Not as many African American and Latino voters have been going out early to vote for Joe Biden. The hope is that they'll be out there today voting for Joe Biden, but there has been that slight wariness, but a whole broad range of people that the Biden campaign is relying on.
Right, Nick, support for people of color, for women's issues by the Democrats has been quite evident also in the choice of the vice president candidate in Kamala Harris. To what extent for Joe Biden could that be a game changer, a distinction factor? How have people been responding during his campaigns about his choice of the running mate?
Well, yes, they've seemed to have responded very well for Kamala Harris as both a black and Indian American person. She's able to pick up a good deal of support. The Indian American community in the US is a voting group that is very important that the Biden campaign is looking to. They only make up about 1% of the US population, but they are particularly in large numbers in important swing states, places like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. There's large communities of Indian Americans. And 4 years ago, we saw the majority, 3/4, voting for Hillary Clinton. Opinion polls recently have suggested that 72% of Indian Americans would vote for Joe Biden, about 22% for Donald Trump. So certainly much more support when it comes to the Indian American community for Joe Biden. I think part of that has been helped by the fact that Kamala Harris is on the ticket, and she has been playing on her Indian heritage as well as her black heritage. So it's an important voting bloc. They're looking to them, hoping that they can get out the vote for the Democrats.
Nick, Donald Trump has said that he will be moving court against what he says would be late counting of mail-in ballots after November 3, the election day. Is the Biden campaign all prepared to face such lawsuits?
Well, yes, they also have lawyers prepared to be able to send in. Donald Trump has already suggested he'll be sending in lawyers as early as tonight. That is causing some concern, not just amongst the Democrats, but amongst legal analysts right across the United States. This suggestion that Donald Trump may look to claim some sort of victory either in states or nationally before we have the full picture. Bear in mind that every single election, voting of ballots continues for several days afterwards. It's just receiving more attention and focus this time around. For example, in Pennsylvania, they can't start counting the votes until election day. So they started a couple of hours ago, but they count some of the in-person votes before they count the postal ballots. And the majority of the postal ballots are likely to have come from Democrat supporters. So we may not get a clear picture. It may begin to show, for example, with those exit polls, with the votes that are being counted after the polls close, that they favour the Republicans, but there would still be a whole heap of votes for the Democrats that are yet to be counted, and that may take several days yet to come. So it may not be clear tonight a definitive winner. We may take some time for that to become evident.
Right. Nick, you've been closely tracking Joe Biden's campaign. A short while ago, he sent a tweet referring to the legacy of his previous experience as an administrator, as vice president in President Obama's administration, where President Obama spoke about hope. He speaks about healing. So there seems to be a conscious joining of legacies and a certain promise of return of good old days, as it were. How significantly is that resonating with the voters in the US?
Yeah, it's very interesting, the choice of those two words, hope for President Obama, healing for Joe Biden, hoping at this time, in the middle of a pandemic in which 230,000 Americans have died, more than 9 million been infected, hoping that he can heal America. He says that this election is a fight for the soul of the nation. He feels that there is healing that needs to be done, not just on a COVID-19 level, but also in terms of the divisions that have been exacerbated during the last 4 years under the President Trump's presidency. He is trying to tie himself to President Obama. We've seen Obama come out on the campaign trail very heavily in the last week or so. He's been sending him to important swing states like Florida, like Georgia, a state that the Democrats are hoping to steal off of the Republicans. So yes, he is relying, I guess, on that Obama effect, the fact that they work so closely, trying to rely on that a huge amount of support, in particular from the African American community that President Obama enjoyed. I think it has been important for Joe Biden to rely on that Obama effect during his campaigning, and he's pushing that very much as part of his closing argument today.
Right, Nick, thank you for having joined us from Delaware, the home state of Joe Biden, and Joe Biden is currently in Pennsylvania. That's the place he's chosen to be for the election day. Well, let's also listen in to what Joe Biden had to say at a rally in Pennsylvania.
We've been through a lot in this country since we announced. America's facing a confluence of crises unlike anything in living memory. We're still in the battle for the soul of America. Decency, honor, respect. Where has it gone with this president? Well, let me tell you something, folks. Tomorrow's the beginning of a new day. Tomorrow, we can put an end to a presidency that has left hard-working Americans out in the cold. Tomorrow, we can put an end to a presidency that has divided this nation and fanned the flames of hate. Tomorrow, we can put an end to a presidency that has failed to protect this nation.
That was presidential candidate Joe Biden addressing a rather colorful public meeting. It was titled Battle for the Soul of the United States of America. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, if I can bring that theme to you, a battle for the soul of America. We're talking about what is in the mind of the Americans. To what extent are these themes, soul of values, liberal democratic values, to what extent do they drive decisions of who to elect the next president?
No idea how, you know, that old expression, when my dad lived up there and we had to move, when things kind of fell apart in terms of jobs. But I had my great-grandfather, Edward Francis Blewett, was the first Irish Catholic elected to the state senate in the state of Pennsylvania, from Scranton, 1907. And, you know, it's a long, long history, but it's good to be home. And one of the things, I know everybody says, why do you keep calling it home? Well, you know, I left here when I was going into 4th grade, but I came home almost all summers, every summer. When I got married to my deceased wife, my wedding party was 7 people, 5 of my friends from Scranton, I grew up with. And so, you know, then when I learned, like you did, all my basic values. I learned at my grandpa's table at 2446 North Washington Avenue that money does not determine your wealth. I learned that there wasn't anything you couldn't do if you set your mind to it. I learned that the basic responsibility everybody had was just to look out, just look for the other guy, look out what's going on, be aware what's going on. And so, you know, they're all the, my dad used to have an expression when we left Scranton, moved down to Delaware. He'd say, Joey, a job is about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community. It's about who you are. It's about being able to look at the kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay. Well, guess what? Well, a lot of people can't say that now. A lot of people can't look at the kids in the eye and say it's going to be okay. I ran for 3 reasons. I'm not going to stop, not keep you out here. Number one, I said when I announced I wanted to restore the soul of the country. What I meant wasn't being melodramatic. All I meant was restore basic decency and honor to the White House. When I saw those folks come out of those fields down in Charlottesville, carrying those torches, and you close your eyes and remember the saw, the veins bulging, people hating, carrying Nazi flags, talking about how, in fact, this country was so back with prejudice that existed. That's when I decided I had to run. That's when my granddaughters and the other 3 of them came to see me after that happened. They knew I was, and they said, Pop, you gotta run. We know it's gonna be ugly. Because their whole life they've either had a father who was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware, or a grandpop who was a senator or a vice president. And that's why we ran. The second reason we ran is we gotta restore the backbone of the country. You all know it. You know, the middle class built this country. Wall Street didn't build it, the middle class built it. And unions built the middle class. And they're getting clobbered right now. They're getting clobbered. The third reason I'm running is what I want to talk upbeat about today, and that is uniting this country. We have to unite the country. We can do it. I think the country's ready. But I basically came to say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Joe! Thank you, Joe!
No sacrifice, the greatest honor in my life. The greatest honor in my life. And I'm sure the mayor and Bobby feel the same way about serving. You know, it's a great honor. So I want to thank you all, and I'm not. I know you're out canvassing. Knock on 3,000-4,000 doors. We'll have no problem. No, I'm on shit. Thank you for what you've done. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. Got some white beer.
And that was a live introduction of Democrat Joe Biden with voters in Pennsylvania. And Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, if I can come back to you with the same question. It seems Joe Biden's rhetoric is very high on values. Even when he's talking about jobs, he says it's not just about paychecks, it's about dignity. How do you see this particular rhetoric in reaching out to the Americans?
Has a resonance with a certain segment of the society, and he's talking to his vote base. For a certain segment of the society, it's a question of livelihoods. And what has happened in the process of globalization is twofold. In the US, I'm talking of. One is the middle class base has shrunk, poverty levels have gone up, concentration of wealth is very acute in a few hands. So that is the angst that President Trump taps into, and taps into quite effectively. So now that so much has been said and done, what Joe Biden is trying to do is to sound presidential, come across as a statesman, rise above politics, and approach his voter base. So this will he'll be heard with respect. But whether it will impact the voter turnout is I do not think there will be much of an impact. Now, would you like me to touch upon the other question, or I pause here?
Sure, please, Ambassador Prakash.
Now, as far as we were talking about what is going to be the impact of the presidency if there is a shift or if there is no shift on India-US relations. One is the big picture, and it is remarkable how over the last 20 years since the visit of Bill Clinton in March 2000, the relationship has grown. The very fact that we have something like 60 dialogue mechanisms, the very fact that we have now a 2+2 ministerial dialogue, and we are covering everything under the sun with the US is quite significant. And under successive administrations in India or the US, the relationship has kept growing. So that is remarkable. At the same time, I must mention that relationship, we have found that the Republican administrations have been more focused on the big picture. And whether it was President Bush, who did the heavy lifting for us to get us the NSG waiver, or President Trump, who has infused so much of momentum in the security and defense relationship, in Quad, in other aspects, that is quite significant. With the Democrats, the other issues also which Mohan alluded to do come into the picture. So, but overall, I would think that regardless of which administration comes to power, it is only a bit of an emphasis here or there, but the relationship will continue to grow, and it is the other last point that I would like to make is the China factor, because when you talk of the India-US relationship, there is the bilateral component which is very, very strong, but there is also the rise of China, the aggression of China, the expansionist tendencies of China, where President Trump has been quite upfront. And similarly on terrorism that you were talking about, he has called out Pakistan. He has spoken about what Pakistan has been up to.
Yes, now, Ambassador Prakash. Ambassador Prakash, you are underlining the way Donald Trump has been strident on China on the issue of terrorism and on a whole lot of issues, and it remains to be seen if that transition is to happen now from Trump to Biden. If that really is the way the polls turn out to be, then how Biden presidency is going to be different from Trump presidency. But that's all the time that we have for now. Ambassador Prakash and Ambassador Mohankumar, thank you so much for having joined us for this. But this coverage on DD India is going to continue.
Absolutely.
And now Sakal and Ramesh, our colleagues, will be joining us and will be taking this further. But do not forget that this is one place that has got you totally covered on the US presidential elections. So a comprehensive non-stop analysis continues.
Race for White House continues, and all the updates on DD India. Stay tuned.
Namaste land. Marhaban ila al-Hind.